He was adopted by a billionaire after losing his parents. But inside the mansion, the boy faced years of silent suffering. He was never allowed to sit at the table, eat like a child, or speak without fear. Everyone saw a perfect family, but none of them knew the strict rules he was quietly forced to follow behind closed doors. That is, until one day a quiet new maid started noticing the signs. A whisper that didn't match his smile, a routine that felt too controlled, a silence that spoke louder than words, and then the moment that changed everything. She discovered the truth he had been too afraid to say out loud. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Arthur was a billionaire known all around the world. People respected him for his intelligence, his money, and his calm attitude. But one day, everything changed. His wife went into labor, but something went wrong. She didn't survive the birth, and neither did the baby. In just one moment, Arthur lost both his wife and his child. Everyone felt sorry for him, but Arthur did not feel just sadness. Inside, he felt like life had betrayed him. He didn't cry or scream. He stayed quiet on the outside, but deep down, a cold kind of anger started to grow. Arthur no longer believed in things like destiny, luck, or love. What really mattered, he thought, was control. If he had more control, maybe this tragedy wouldn't have happened. So he made a decision. He would never again feel weak or helpless. He began to rebuild his world, but this time he would be the one in charge of every part. He no longer smiled often. He avoided close friendships. He focused only on his work and his money. His eyes, once soft and warm, became sharp and cold. Over the next few years, Arthur's company expanded quickly. Everything he touched seemed to turn into gold. But even though his bank accounts kept growing, the empty feeling inside him didn't go away. He never spoke their names. He never visited their graves. Instead, he buried the pain deep inside and worked even harder. The truth was that Arthur was still deeply wounded, but he didn't want to heal. He wanted to dominate, to never feel powerless again. As time passed, Arthur noticed something important. He had money, respect, and control, but people were beginning to see him as distant and isolated. News articles questioned his personal life. Business partners wondered why he always worked alone. This bothered Arthur because he knew image was everything. A man without a family could start to look suspicious or unstable in the public eye. So Arthur began to plan something new. He didn't want love or companionship. He wanted control over how people saw him. Arthur had made up his mind. He would adopt a child. In his eyes, it was not about love or kindness. It was about control. He wanted someone to shape and raise in his own way. After many visits to exclusive orphanages, he finally found a boy who seemed to match what he was looking for. The child was small, with calm eyes and a soft voice. He didn't speak much, but he listened carefully. Arthur saw potential. Without hesitation, he began the adoption process. The media quickly picked up the story. "Billionaire gives hope to orphan," the headlines read. Journalists praised him as a generous man with a kind heart. Public opinion shifted. People who once saw Arthur as cold now called him a hero. At charity events, strangers approached him to thank him for his act of love. But none of it was real. He didn't feel warmth or love. He felt satisfaction. His plan was working. The boy became part of that plan. To the boy, everything felt magical at first. He had come from a place where there was very little. Suddenly, he had his own room full of colorful books, toys, and a soft bed. He ate well and had clean clothes. The boy believed he had been rescued. He didn't understand the real reason he was there. He thought Arthur wanted to be his father. He tried to please Arthur, doing well in his lessons and always staying quiet when told, but something was missing. Arthur never hugged him, never said, "I love you." and never asked how he felt. Inside the house, rules were strict. The boy couldn't go to certain rooms. He had to wake up and sleep at exact times. Every activity had a goal to make the boy smarter, stronger, or more obedient. There was no space for fun or mistakes. If the boy spoke too loudly or asked too many questions, Arthur would correct him with cold words. Arthur didn't yell, but his silence could be worse. One look from him was enough to make the boy feel nervous. Over time, the child started to act more like a machine. He stopped talking unless spoken to. He smiled less. As the years went by, the boy began to show who he really was. He was quiet, gentle, and often preferred to be alone. He liked to draw for hours and softly hum songs he made up in his head. He didn't enjoy loud parties or big groups of people. Arthur noticed all these things and became more and more frustrated. This was not what he had wanted in a son. The boy's softness felt like a problem to Arthur. Instead of supporting the child's natural personality, Arthur saw it as a flaw that needed to be fixed. Arthur tried to change the boy through pressure and control. At public events, he gave strict instructions. Smile when people talk to you. Stand straight. Don't speak unless someone asks you a question. People would compliment Arthur, saying his son was well-behaved and polite, but they didn't see what happened later. After each event, Arthur would criticize him. He called him weak, boring, and a disappointment. He said things like, "You're not worthy of my name." The boy didn't understand what he was doing wrong. He tried to be better, but nothing was ever enough. Over time, he began to feel nervous all the time, especially around Arthur. The boy started to hide his true self. He stopped drawing when anyone could see. He only hummed quietly when he was sure he was alone. He watched every word he said, worried it would be the wrong one. When Arthur walked into a room, the boy stood up fast and kept his eyes low. Arthur was tired of hiring workers who didn't last long. Many housekeepers had come and gone over the years. After the latest one quit, he told his staff to find someone reliable. A few days later, Helena was hired. She was young, quiet, and did her job with care. What no one knew was that Helena carried deep pain. Years ago, she had lost her daughter in a terrible accident. Since then, she had become distant and kept her feelings hidden. When Helena first stepped into the mansion, she immediately felt something strange. The house was clean and beautiful, but it didn't feel warm. Everything looked perfect, but it felt cold. There were no sounds of laughter, talking, or even music. Then she saw the boy. He was sitting on the floor of his room, quietly drawing. When she passed by, he quickly put his paper away and looked down. Helena greeted him, but he didn't answer. She noticed something in his behavior, a kind of fear she had seen before. That kind of silence was not normal. It was the silence of someone trying to survive something painful. At first, Helena just did her job. She didn't ask questions, but each day she noticed more. The boy never smiled. He always seemed nervous, especially when Arthur was near. Helena saw how the boy watched his father carefully, like he was trying to guess what would happen next. The boy walked lightly, almost like he didn't want to be heard. At dinner, he didn't talk. He sat straight and stiff. Something was wrong here. With time, Helena started noticing things that didn't feel right. The boy would freeze when Arthur entered the room. He would stop whatever he was doing and stand still, eyes lowered, shoulders tense. He acted like he was waiting for orders. During breakfast, the boy wouldn't start eating unless someone told him he could. Once, as she was serving lunch, he quietly whispered, "He doesn't let me sit, Mommy." Helena felt her chest tighten. She leaned down and asked gently, "Who doesn't let you sit?" The boy didn't answer. He simply lowered his head and looked away. Helena began observing more closely. The boy always waited for permission before sitting down to eat. If he forgot, he would stand next to the table until someone noticed. Another day, she heard Arthur scolding the boy over a spilled drop of water. Arthur demanded that he get on his knees and apologize. The boy obeyed without arguing, his head low, eyes wide. Helena stood behind the door, fists clenched. These weren't rules, they were methods of control. It wasn't discipline, it was cruelty disguised as order. Helena started showing small signs of affection toward the boy. It happened naturally. One day, after dinner, she gave him an extra piece of dessert. Another time, she noticed he had trouble sleeping, so she sat by his door and told him a short story. One afternoon, when he looked especially sad, she gave him a quick hug in the hallway. The hug was short, but the boy held on to her tightly. The boy reacted well to Helena's kindness. With her, he spoke a little more. He even smiled once or twice. He started waiting for her in the mornings and followed her around the house, saying nothing, just being close. It was clear that her presence made him feel safe. The bond between Helena and the boy deepened. He began to quietly call her mommy, not in front of others, but during private moments. Helena didn't correct him. Each time she heard it, she felt something inside her shift. She hadn't used the word mother for years. One night, Helena was walking through the hallway when she heard shouting. It was Arthur. She moved closer, careful not to make noise. The door to the office was slightly open. She stayed behind it, hidden in the dark. Inside, Arthur was screaming at the boy. The reason, the boy had spilled a small amount of juice on the carpet while serving guests. It was a tiny accident. No one had even reacted, but Arthur was furious. "You're a shame," he shouted, pushing the boy back. The child cried, scared and confused, saying, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." He fell to his knees, still begging. Helena's hands trembled. She had never seen anything so cruel. Watching that scene, Helena felt something break inside her. This wasn't a father correcting a child. This was pure humiliation. The boy's tears weren't just from fear. They were from pain and confusion. That night, Helena couldn't sleep. Her mind kept repeating what she had witnessed. When morning came, she put on her uniform like always, but her heart was heavy. Seeing the boy at breakfast, quiet, eyes swollen, confirmed what she already knew. He wasn't okay. He was disappearing a little more every day. Helena knew now that she had a choice to make. She could keep doing her job, staying silent and watching the boy suffer, or she could act. Helena began acting differently. She paid more attention than ever. She memorized patterns. What time Arthur got home when the boy was alone, what parts of the house had cameras and which didn't. She started keeping a small notebook hidden in her closet. In it, she wrote down everything, dates, times, exact words Arthur used, how the boy reacted, and any visible injuries. She wrote like someone building a case. From that day forward, Helena became a quiet, protective presence in the boy's life. She stayed close to him whenever possible. She didn't smother him with attention, but she made sure he knew she was there. Every time Arthur left the room, Helena would give the boy a small smile or a gentle touch on the shoulder. She whispered things like, "I'm here," or "You're safe now." Over time, the boy began to relax a little when she was close. The boy slowly started to open up. He began talking more when they were alone, especially at night after Arthur went to bed. Lying under the covers, he would whisper stories from his past. He talked about being scared, about the rules that confused him, and about how he never knew what would make Arthur angry. Helena listened to everything without interrupting. She didn't always have the right words to answer, but she always stayed. Sometimes he would fall asleep with her sitting beside his bed, holding his hand. Arthur had reached his limit. He could no longer ignore what was happening under his own roof. The boy was slipping away from his control, and Helena was the reason. One afternoon, Arthur entered the kitchen where Helena was cleaning. He didn't yell at first. His voice was low, tense, and angry. He accused her of turning the boy against him, of poisoning his mind. He said she was crossing the line, that she was a servant, not a mother. Helena stood straight, not afraid. She looked him in the eyes and replied without shouting, "You've never been a father," she said. "You use fear, not love." Arthur's hands clenched into fists, but he didn't speak. What neither of them knew was that the boy had heard everything. He was standing behind the hallway wall, tears falling silently as he listened to every word. The boy had never heard anyone speak to Arthur that way. No one had ever defended him before. For a long time, the boy had thought everything was his fault. But now, listening to Helena speak the truth so clearly, something changed. For the first time, he began to see Arthur not as a powerful, perfect man, but as someone broken, cruel, and wrong. Later that night, while Helena was folding towels, the boy came to her. His eyes were red, but his voice was steady. He sat down beside her and began to speak. Slowly, piece by piece, he shared what had happened over the years. He talked about the nights Arthur made him kneel for mistakes he didn't understand. He described the harsh words and the moments when he cried alone in his room. As he spoke, Helena didn't interrupt. She listened carefully, holding his hand gently. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment he trusted her enough to speak. After their conversation, Helena knew what she had to do. Words weren't enough. Arthur had spent years building a reputation as a generous, strong, and successful father. No one would accept a maid's word against his. So Helena got to work. Quietly, she collected evidence. She began recording conversations with her phone hidden in her pocket. She wrote down everything the boy shared, organizing it in a notebook. She also spoke to 2 other staff members who had seen troubling situations but had stayed quiet out of fear. Helena had waited for the right time. Now it was coming. The information she had gathered was solid. The boy's testimony was clear. The recordings spoke for themselves. The evening was planned as another one of Arthur's grand events. The dining room was filled with important people, business partners, close friends, and high-level investors. Expensive food was being served, music played softly, and Arthur stood at the head of the room, confident and composed, ready to make a speech about success, legacy, and family. But Helena had planned something very different. Dressed neatly, she stepped forward just before Arthur raised his glass. At first, people were confused. She was the housekeeper. What was she doing interrupting? Helena held up her phone and calmly said she had something important to share. Then she played the first recording. Arthur's voice filled the room, cold and cruel, shouting insults at the boy. She played another and another. The room fell silent. Guests looked at each other in shock. Helena didn't stop there. After playing the recordings, she began to speak. She described the things she had seen in the house, how Arthur forced the boy to kneel, how he yelled at him for tiny mistakes, how he treated him like a possession, not a child. Then she turned to the boy who had been sitting quietly in a chair nearby. She asked him if he wanted to say anything. The room held its breath. The boy stood up slowly. His hands trembled, but his voice came out steady. "He was never my father," he said, "only my jailer." There were no more questions after that. The illusion Arthur had created for so many years shattered in a few minutes. Arthur's face changed. He looked around the room and saw only judgment. Someone had already called the police. When they arrived, Helena handed over the evidence. The officers asked the boy a few gentle questions, and he answered them clearly. Arthur was placed in handcuffs and led out through the same hallway he once used to impress guests. This time, no one clapped. No one stood up. Cameras flashed as he walked out in disgrace. The newspapers would explode with the story the next morning. But for the boy, it wasn't a scandal. It was a beginning. The man who hurt him was gone. Finally, he was free. The news spread fast. Television reports, online articles, and social media posts repeated the story again and again. Lawyers came forward to support the case. Psychologists and child advocacy groups praised Helena's courage. The court moved quickly. With the boy's testimony, the recordings, and the quiet support of other workers from the mansion, Arthur had no way to escape the charges. During the hearing, the boy sat beside Helena, holding her hand. When the judge asked about guardianship, the boy said, "She's my mother now." Helena was granted full custody. The legal process was clear, and the support from the public made it stronger. The boy would never have to go back. Weeks passed. The mansion was emptied, and soon part of the inheritance was legally transferred to Helena and the boy by court order. What mattered was that she could now care for the boy without fear. They moved into a smaller house in a quiet neighborhood. No staff, no cameras, no gold statues in the hallway, just peace. Helena decorated the boy's room with drawings, books, and colors he liked. He chose the curtains himself. They cooked together, laughed at the dinner table, and sometimes fell asleep on the couch watching cartoons. The boy began therapy and started school again. Every morning he kissed Helena on the cheek before leaving, and every night he called her mom with a full heart. They were no longer afraid. Now, when they sat at the table together, there was no tension, no silence filled with fear. The boy talked freely about his day. He smiled without being told. He asked questions. He laughed. Helena watched him grow, not just in size, but in spirit. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was becoming who he really was, one day at a time. Helena, too, felt like a new person. She had carried her grief for years, thinking life had ended with her daughter, but life had brought her something unexpected, not a replacement, but a new beginning. They ate together, read together, walked in the park on weekends. Their home was not perfect, but it was full of love. And for the first time, the boy didn't feel broken. He felt worthy. He felt seen. The man who once claimed to be his father was gone. What remained now was truth, freedom, and a real family. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.